Well, hi everyone. My name's Frank Fisher, and this is my ceramics show. I've been doing ceramics since college, which was in 1980. I took ceramics at Central Michigan from Jay Shirtliff, and I took it for 5 years. And when it came time to graduate, I had to decide whether I wanted to be a ceramicist and not make a whole lot of money, or my family had a advertising business. I could go into the ad business. And I decided that I would go into the ad business because I knew I had a job waiting for me, and I knew that my financial career would be a lot more concrete. So I left ceramics for about 15 years and spent the rest of the time in the ad business. I worked at my father's place, which was F.J. Fisher Advertising, for till 1996. And he passed away, and he was the key person that kept a lot of the accounts going. So that forced me to go into advertising on my own, and I started an agency and did that for 10 years. Had a little bit of health issues, closed my shop, sold a big portion of it, and I've been working at Oakland University in their graphic design area since 2006. So although I've got my roots in ceramics, I'm basically an ad guy. And my real interest when I was in ceramics was I loved John Glick. I love Susan Stevenson, if you're familiar with these people. If you saw my work then, you'd think that I was pretty much a Glick knockoff. I just absolutely love that stuff. So if you kind of look at a timeline, around 2000, I'm looking for something to do artistically, and so I decide to get into ceramics again, and I take a course with John Murphy at Schoolcraft College. And that pretty much changed my life. There's a few things that changed our lives along the way, but that was a real key ingredient. I struggled with being John Glick again for 2-3 years, and I don't know what prompted me. I think it was that I really liked antiques and industrial items. I did a lot of industrial advertising. So I became very familiar with warehouses and factories, getting tours of them to do brochures. And so I started to kind of get a nice appeal for anything that was industrial. And I was at an antique shop, and I was looking at some of these old gas cans and stuff, and I'd been really getting into teapots lately, and it wasn't much of a leap to turn a gas can into a tea can, which is what I call them. So I started making these gas cans. And a lot of things happened at once that were very fortunate. One is that I discovered a porcelain clay called 99G made by Rovin. And Rovin's clay has got a malachite in there, and to make a long story short, it's very durable. It can go through thermal shock, you can do raku firing, you can do all sorts of different types of firing with this clay. So that gave me a porcelain clay, which gives me a nice white cone, a nice white body on it. And it gives me, porcelain's got a very fine, it's a fine surface, it's a fine clay body, so that you can be very precise with it. You're not running into little chunks of grog in that. I started making these gas cans, and right away I called them tea cans because I got this advertising background, so you got to have some kind of fancy name to everything. So I called them tea cans, and I made a couple of them, and people seemed to really like them. But I had only been making them with real corporate names. I'd been making them like there's a Sinclair one here. I did a lot of Mobile Gas ones, and they kind of took off. They did very well. The problem was they were very labor intensive, and I think the best way to show you how intensive is I kind of put together some props. And the way I started the whole thing is I went on internet and I went on eBay, and I have to explain something here now. I am OCD So I'm extremely organized, very thorough, but I've also been diagnosed to be ADD, which means that I'm very organized for a very short time, and then something shiny shows up and I jump to that. So in fact, if you look at the show, you've got gas cans, you've got wall art, you've got bottles, you got these pottery shards. It's kind of all over. It's because I get really caught up in one thing and then something else catches my attention and I shift over to that. So you're going to kind of see how I get kind of carried away with things. So I made a scrapbook of every kind of gas can, and of course I had to organize them each page. And this became kind of my swap file. So I would sit down and I would pick out a can here and I would try to mimic it. And the first couple of years, everything pretty much I copied exactly what existed. So this became my reference for form. But I needed to develop a way to get color and graphics on them. I didn't want to use decals. I wanted the glaze to be part of it. So what I ended up doing is I started creating, I used Xeroxes and things like that, but I would make like sort of these rough computer drawings of, this was actually the rough for syngas. It started out being called Star, and then I would play with the graphics, because you know I'm doing this for a living. Ford, I'd make all these sort of printouts, and you're saying, well, what good are all those things? Well, the way I ended up putting these graphics on is I would cut these out of paper and put spray glue on them, and then I would use that as like a mask, and I would stamp all the different colors on here. And then for each color, I would have to cut a different mask. I brought the masks, the steps for when I did this. And most of the stuff that I have in the show isn't just decorative. There's a long, complicated story behind it. For this one here, which was done maybe about a year and a half ago, I wanted to start to have, I think you need like a testimonial. In advertising, it's always nice to have a testimonial, to have a spokesman, have something like that. And I said, well, you know, if I'm going to have a spokesman, that means I'm going to have somebody somewhat famous or somebody that people can relate to. And I didn't really want to go pursue getting approval from actual real people out there. I wanted to get somebody, though, that was real, and also it had to be from like the 50s, a nostalgia thing. And it just so happens that in our family background, there is a race car driver. It was my uncle's uncle. His name was Chet Miller, and he raced for Novi, and he was referred to as the Dean of the Brickyard, and he raced from the 20s on through the 50s. And he was actually an Indianapolis car racer. He was a bit of a character. He is not a blood descendant. He is a descendant through my uncle, who was through marriage. So I contacted my cousin, and I said, I'd like to do a gas can, but I want to use Chet on it. He says, oh yeah, that's fine, that's fine. Go ahead, use them all you want. And the reason I had to get all this permission is because I'd starting to get more popular and get my work started to get reproduced more often, and I was starting to get a little gun shy of copyright laws. It's one thing to do like a commission where somebody says put Mobile Gas on something or put Sinclair Gas on something. It's another thing though when you start getting a little press and they start getting reproduced. I started getting a little gun shy, and I noticed that some of the publications were asking for my work, but they were also getting gun shy when I would send them real brands out there. They just didn't want to deal with that whole copyright issue. So I started inventing graphics, and this one is one that I did with a testimonial, but I really liked the fact that it had a personal connection. So I did one, long story, for Chet Miller. There's actually a picture of him, and there's his car at Indianapolis, He actually died on the course. He was in a crash when he was when they're qualifying. So he died in 52. I think it was 52. And so there's kind of this neat little connection that in our family we have this race car driver. So to begin the can graphics, what I did is I need to get a portrait of him. So I sketch out a real crisp black and white portrait, because everything I'm dealing with on these has got to be either black or white, because I'm dealing with stamps. And then I create all the graphics, which in this case, if you look at that, that would be like the front label. And you can see how it's been cut out. What I would do is I would spray that with glue, and I'd wrap that on the can, and I could then put glaze to get all these nice crisp letters in shape. I could put glaze on that, and it would not put glaze in certain areas. And I would slowly build up the whole thing that way. So then I had to do one for here. I've got another one here for the silhouette of his head. Then it comes time to doing all the lettering. All those are little individual pieces that are all cut out with a sharp knife. I just have a cutting board, and I'll just put the TV on and spend an hour or two cutting out numbers and letters and all that sort of stuff. Then I delicately glue those on here, and then I will stamp the glaze all around it. And so I slowly build this whole thing up to where it's all very precise and very tight, and then I can fire it. I raku fire these. It takes about 3 hours to fire it, and it's pretty standard. I put it into the typical combustibles and that. Some of the glazes are just glazes out of the jar. Some of them are custom glazes from like Piepenburg, and some of the more noted raku glazes out there. When it's all done, I need to put a handle on. I get the handles from eBay. I buy old relic gas cans and steal the handles from them and rebend them and put them on there. I try to get ones that are color coordinated to go with the colors that are on there. Some of the background here, obviously I've told you about Chet Miller. I just made up the wins label. He raced about 5 or 6 times at Indianapolis. He never did win, but I thought it was kind of neat that he would actually be on there and says wins. Letter F for Frank. 5 is my favorite number. 20 ounces, I just made that up. I saw this somewhere about tilt, and I always thought it was kind of obvious that you would actually have to tilt it up, so I kind of have fun with that. There's all these arbitrary numbers on here. I just kind of invent stuff on these little widgets and sprockets and stuff like that. To talk about frack for a minute here, there's all that stuff in the news now about fracking for oil and stuff, and I thought, well, might as well have a fracking gasoline can, a frack brand out there. So that's what that one's about. Sinclair is pretty straightforward. Syngas, we're doing a lot of things to the planet. That one's a little bit more political. I kind of like the fact that it phonetically sounds like sin and gas. That's the white can down here at the end. All these, again, would all be hand cut with stencils and that. And that's kind of the story on the gas cans. Now, another part of my brain is graphics. And I think I'll talk just a few minutes about some of this stuff here. We'll start with the one in the middle. The woman's face is my wife, Pam Fisher. I met her when I was in college, and she ended up being in the college paper for a few minutes. One issue there where she gave an opinion, and I just love that photo. This would have been 1982 or 83, and I saved that photo all these years, and I ended up making this piece of her. Everything on the walls and all the bottles and all that, they're all made by a slightly different process than these stencils. They're made by printing plates. And they're the same kind of printing plates that we used for the last century. And they're impressed into the clay. Now, I've researched it, and it's very expensive to go get old-fashioned printing plates made now. But I did stumble upon this process called solar plates. And this is another one of these OCD things where you just doesn't seem to stop. I just kept getting more and more involved. I'm making my own printing plates, and how I do that is, I don't have this stencil here. Here's a sample of, I get transparent sheets. These are just laser printed onto a laser, onto these acetates. I use these on an unexposed sheet, and I take it out. This is dollar bill, this is Pam. But I would take that out into the sun and I expose it for 2 minutes, and I take it down into my basement and I wash away all the unhardened, it's ultraviolet, all the unhardened material, and that leaves me with this dimensional piece, and you can kind of feel that. It's actually so that if I press into the clay, it leaves that image. Now, when I first started doing these, I had to use existing printing plates. And again, eBay, America's garage sale, I was getting all sorts of printing plates. And some of them are on some of these pieces. They became my favorites. But it was very limiting, and I turned into an editor. And I wanted to actually be able to create my own images, like my wife, like downtown Detroit. This is my father. These are some blossoms from an apple tree behind us. This is obviously, that's me. And most of the stuff on the walls and that are all images that I've gone out and photographed or drawn and then made my own printing plates for. And that gave me total freedom, because now I didn't have to rely on what I could find. I could just go out and make whatever images I wanted for printing plates. The next step was how to color them. There's 3 or 4 processes I use. One is where I rub the clay onto the surface, let it dry, and then scrub it off with like a scrubbing pad, like what you'd use for your sinks. Another way, I use glazes, and I water them down to about 50% water, 50% glaze, and I flood them on like a watercolor. And if you keep scrubbing, it'll kind of all settle down into the recesses and kind of leave it brighter on the top, and I can scrub that off. If it's a real delicate image, like the images of Pam and my father, which are really small, delicate dots, I use paper towel because it will give way and just it takes a longer time, but you can kind of polish that glaze off that top surface. If I used a scrub pad, it would be taking too much of the glaze off. I use sandpaper in some cases where I want a real bright white, and that gets me that glaze down in the nooks and the crannies, and it gives me bare clay on the top surface. Then if I want to come around and sort of touch up a piece, like her lips are just hand painted, the text in there is just hand painted, I can do that. For something like this, I'll do what I just described, and then I come back with another glaze color, and I'll water it down, and I'll just do coats of it over a black that's all been caught in there, and that gives me that technique, that look on it. I noticed that ceramics, there are ceramic collectors, and then there's art collectors, and there's definitely a difference. You see a lot more wall art sell than you do ceramic art, and I got kind of conscious of that, and I wanted to compete more than just with other ceramicists. I wanted to compete on an art market. So I started concentrating on ways to get my art onto the wall so that it could be hung. So there's a lot of stuff here that's two-dimensional, but I'm still sort of playing with the three-dimensional as far as it being printing plates, but it's two-dimensional. Shadow boxes seem to be a good solution for how to display it. So I got real carried away in the shadow box thing. Some of these are IKEA's shadow, or just plain old boxes that I tear apart and rebuild. Again, that OCD, that whole thing where I can't rest till it's just quite right. And I cut little bits of foam for the back so they're dimensional and stuff. But it's getting me on the walls, so I can feel that, I feel now that I could compete with other wall artists, or just artists in general, and not be just a ceramic artist. One of the other solutions I had for the wall art was to start making my own frames from clay. And that's what this piece here, it's a self-portrait, and I named it an ocular frame after an eyeball because I like the fact that it's round. A year or so ago I was going through the garage and I came up with all this molding, like what you use for trim around doors and stuff, and I was looking at that and I was thinking I'd really love those grooves. That would be really cool to put those on pots on the wheel and that. So I started just grabbing different scraps, and I would go to I'd go to Home Depot, and they have those scrap bins there when people cut off the excess, and I'd go through it, and you go up there, and you know, I'd get little pieces like that, and they, you know, they could never sell them. They said, no, go ahead, take it. So I got accumulated all sorts of different pieces, and I would do it on bowls and things like that, on my functional ware. But I couldn't help thinking that there has to be some way that I could work it into here, but I could never find a piece big enough. What I ended up doing is I grabbed a whole bunch of my favorite pieces and I chopped them together, and I tried to find a groove profile that I thought that would work real good as a frame. And if you look at it, this here is basically this inner piece, and then you could actually go right on around and it would follow this whole profile. So I throw these, basically this is on the wheel, I throw it and I start with this against the bottom of the wheel and press my clay on the inside, and then I slowly wrap it in, and that forms the frame. So I've got a ceramic frame, and I kind of like that. I like playing with that different proportion, the fact that it's a round rather than a square. So much wall art has always got corners to it. And the neat thing about ceramics is it's very free form. You know, you can do whatever shape you want. A lot of my pieces, like I said, there's like a story behind them. In fact, if I look at these, all of them, there's like a chain of different items that go through my mind. When I was a kid, I really loved stamp collecting. I was really big into stamp collecting. I loved the graphics, I loved the imagery and all that. And you'll see there's parts of old-time stamps in here. And that was kind of this personal joke that I started having with myself about the fact that I'm using stamps when I make the clay. And if I'm making stamps, then they're part of my stamp collection, and it goes back to when I was a kid. So a lot of these, the root of all this is me being a stamp collector as a kid, and now I'm making my own stamps. And then I went so far as there's a piece on the far wall there that's got a coffin in the middle, and that's my version of a 5-cent stamp. And the coffin in the middle, which says war on it, is actually one of my pieces. So I'm taking my own artwork, recreating it, and making postage stamps, making printing plates out of the postage stamps, and then stamping them on the clay. So there's this big cycle of what's going on. So that is literally part of my stamp collection. The comic books were huge for me as a kid. There's some pieces here. There's another piece over there that has those little ads that you used to see in the back to order things. I was ordering that stuff when I was a kid, and it was always junk when it came. But you know, I like that whole feeling where you get excited about how something's gonna, when you're reading about it, it's gonna be really awesome, and then you know, you get it and it's kind of this letdown. But there was that moment when you're a kid where the exuberance, and I really like that. Oh, there's another one of my postage stamps tucked in the corner here. I was thinking of stamps that the United States would probably never produce. And I didn't think they'd ever produce one about defense and then show the atom bomb from World War II. But it's a valid possibility. The brain brain's kind of funny. I always wanted to have a brain stamp. I couldn't find a brain stamp. I spent years looking for a brain. I never could find a brain. I finally had to make my own brain. So it was a kind of story. The Frankenstein, my father was an artist as well as being in the ad business. He was a painter, and I distinctly remember when I was a child, I was really into those Aurora monster models. Those things were just it. And he came home one day with that kit. And I knew my dad could paint because there was paintings on the wall, but I'd never seen him paint. He had stopped. And he said, "You want to put this one together?" And I said, "Yeah." And so he did. And you know, when you see a highly talented artist put together an Aurora kit and then paint it, it was like something out of Hollywood. It was incredible, you know. And I immediately, you know, that was the best thing in the world. I immediately took it outside, started playing with it, and it got all busted up. But that moment and seeing what he could do with all that stuck with me, and it was an important image, because I also loved all the old monster movies. So when I was looking for different ideas to make what I would do to make printing plates, I had, you know, a reproduction of those old sheets, and this was the actual monster kit. And so you'll see Frankenstein on there, and you'll see him on several places. I love the story, the Mary Shelley story. I love the story. I love the concept. I love the movies. There's a whole lot of baggage that comes with that image, so I use that a lot. When I ran into health issues, the heart was a problem. I'd have some minor surgery. I'm much better now, but so you'll see the heart here represents physical as well as an emotional symbol. This is just a branding thing, another one of my pieces. This whole pot shard thing was kind of a weird deal. I was watching a show on TV, and they had these people, and they were sifting through, you know, with brushes and all that, and they were brushing away dust from Greek pottery shards and Roman pottery shards, and they were treating them all really delicate. And then it started getting me wondering, you know, they were getting all excited about the images and what that said about their civilization at that point. And that got me wondering what would happen in, you know, 500,000 years if they started digging around my studio. What would they find? What kind of pot shards would they find around my studio? And I said, well, they probably would represent everything that's going through my mind and what's going on in my life right now, because that's what my art is. So basically the pot shard series is like time capsule gone back. This is the stuff that they're going to dig up in my backyard, supposedly in 1,000 years, is these little pot shards from broken pots that didn't quite make it. I use a certain clay that's got that terracotta clay and lots of layering and things like that. They're fired maybe 5-6 times. Each color is a new wash. And I just keep firing them and keep putting on more glazes till I think they look right. And that's when I stop. So some of them get fired 2 times. Some of them, I think this heart one got fired about 6 times. But that's the pot shard series, so it's kind of this time capsule thing. I have a lot of fun with those because I can sit down and I can make several of them, and I can be very playful. I don't have to worry about construction and seams and all that sort of stuff. But I like that. I like that whole pot shard. And I like what it says about a civilization or a society at a certain time, and so I can kind of have fun with that too. That was the one that's the far end with the nuclear stamp. They kind of started out more like that, and then they got a little bit more personal. Till at the end here, it's just blatant branding. There's my maker mark, and then one of my pieces, and then copy. And most of the copy, I think all the copy of anything, of all the stuff in the show, is all text that I've written too. I like to write, so I've just made up. They call it lorem ipsum, they call it Greek copy when you're doing advertising design. And that's just copy that's a placeholder until they write the final copy. Well, I didn't want to put lorem ipsum, but I put something just like it. And I don't know if there's anything in here that you can really read, but it's pretty over the top that just says these words say nothing. And then at the very end of it, I came up with the slogan, words, use them wisely, which I hadn't done. Let's see. This is another one from the comic books. This piece here, I brought props in for this one because like you saw with the Frankenstein thing, some of this stuff goes way back in my youth. And this piece came from those old comic book ads where something was just, they used to have those art tests, you want to be an artist. So I did a play on that and I called it, do you want to be a ceramic artist? And I thought, what's all involved with being a ceramic artist? So I wrote a copy about basically you're poor and muddy. And then I needed to have some sort of visual on it. And I said, well, I should probably use one of my pieces. And then I needed a person to react to it. And I thought, well, I can play a little pun on it and stuff and say, wow, I love it, but is this art? And so the piece is called Love. There was some debate in my own mind whether if something didn't look functional, if it was just sculptural, didn't have a spout, didn't have a neck, whether it was functional art or whether it was real art. And so I had to throw in this blurb, yes, even this is considered real art, you know, just as a reminder. And I got a bunch of, you know, BS copy in there, but you better act now, and then it's a free talent test, but you need to pay for something to get the free test. So I had found a picture of my mom, and so I turned her from the 50s. She was a model at one time for Detroit Edison. She did this thing. So this is the actual original pen and ink drawing I did. I borrowed his head, redrew it. Then I drew my mom in here. Used that to make this when I was in advertising. Hung on to this, stuck it in the basement. Now I'm back doing more of these comic book ads, and I'm trying to think, I need somebody in there that's kind of over the top excited. Who should I use? Well, I'll use my mother again. So my mother is actually saying that, wow, she loves this art and it's my art. So again, it's kind of this whole full circle. To make it, it's the same. It's the solar plates. You know, I design all this on the computer, and I print out a film negative, and I put the film negative on the unexposed plate, and then I use the plate to make the ad. So that's kind of the process on that. But again, it just keeps coming back. There's like, I like this connection. I like that it's very personal. And the same case is a lot of, you know, you can see here the anatomical, and there's a heart issue there. Again, that's directed to me, and no, Pam didn't become a widow. So that's why there's no on there. And yes, because they fixed my heart. This was, I got into the fact that some art, some of my art got more, sells better than other art. I don't know why. Some of it's better liked. And it seems to be a very strange thing to keep making the same piece over and over. You got to keep trying to make new pieces. So I got into taking old pieces of art, turning them into printing plates, and putting them on to new pieces of art so that they're technically new pieces, but they're old pieces. So it's kind of a different way of reproducing them. A lot of it is just sort of puns and stuff. Have you guys ever picked up how light these things are? Oh, you got to pick one up. Here, I brought a piece because that's the other.
Oh, wow.
That's the cool thing about ceramics is now if you go to a museum or you go to a gallery and you look at all the stuff on the wall, you can't ever touch it. You lose that whole experience of interacting. But ceramics is one of those things that you feel compelled to pick it up and touch it. And I thought, isn't that cool? I have this opportunity to kind of leave an impression with somebody. I could easily make that a standard thickness of clay and standard weight, but if I could make that really light, that adds one more little aspect to the encounter when they pick it up. So the pieces are all, I call them ultra thin. I've made them as thin as I possibly can, so that you do have that reaction when you pick one up. I like that. It's like one more aspect to the connection. I think most of these kind of were covered. Detroit scenes, The Widow. The Widow, I have characters that they're kind of like, it's kind of like a play. And I'll sit down and I'll say, okay, you know, I've got to create some sort of narrative to this. And so I have these actors, and I have, one of them's the widow. Frankenstein shows up in a lot of them. There's my mom again. The widow is sometimes with a coffin. Sometimes the nurse is involved because she needed to correct your behavior because you're not taking good care of yourself. There's, that's Scooby-Doo. The heart, like I said, is symbolic of a couple different things. This is pretty much Ward Cleaver from the 50s Leave It to Beaver show. He's very 1950s, very straight-laced. There's my father. I use him a few times. He's the war hero. So I have these different characters, and so they kind of act out different scenes on some of the bottles. The Frankenstein one is this one here got complicated, and I wanted to talk about the fact that I had gone into this heart surgery, and well, it was before I went in the house. Basically, my heart was racing. It was up like 200 beats a minute, and it was a bad thing. It had been doing that for about 10 hours. And the doctors didn't know really how to slow it down without stopping it and restarting it. But that's not like a real good practice to actually stop the heart. And basically, I was in the hospital, and my heart is racing, and they're saying, well, here's how we're going to fix it. We're going to stop it, and then we're going to restart it. And usually it works. And so I just thought that was a heck of a way to practice medicine. That's what they did, and that's what this piece is about. But I didn't want to put it all on there. I wanted it to have a couple levels to it. I wanted to have that delay. So I got into using these QRC codes, and if you use your phone on it and you do that capture code, it'll take you to that whole story I just explained. And again, I get to do some of my graphic design. I get to have a little bit of that modern technology worked into a very old art form, ceramics. The shapes of my pieces too, also, I try to make them relate to something. There's the coffin pieces. I don't have any coffin pieces in here, but I talked about them. The Gothic window, which is basically where this shape comes from. Some churches over in Europe, they have that Gothic window. I like that. This one here is, that's got Pam on it again. And my heart issues. And we have 3 kids, and there's three spouts on it. So it kind of becomes the shape, and the parts of it all become kind of autobiographical. I'm trying to think of anything else. I think that's probably it. I think I've probably spilled everything that I can think of. That's it. Ends quick. Thank you. Any questions?
I was surprised with the brackets for the handle are ceramic.
Yeah.
I just knew they were metal, but how did you incorporate that into the...
To get it attached to the clay body, yeah.
But the fact that it's It's ceramic is amazing.
And they're not structurally sound. You know, if you carried it, you probably go, you know, 100 steps and you just have a handle. They will pop off, and some of that stuff. There comes a point where is it artwork or is it functional? And I finally just said, I'm not going to worry about getting it so that it supports it. It's just going to have to be sculpture, and it's just going to have to be how it is. So I've had one snap off when I was trying to get the handles on, because you got to basically pull them apart, and then you got to bend them just so much so that they stay, and then I want to bend them so there's enough friction that they'll actually hold up or stay up. But none of this would be possible without that clay, that woven clay. And I just ran into that by accident. And I look back on it and I can't believe how fortunate that is, because I've tried other clay bodies. I've tried raku clay bodies, I've tried stoneware bodies and that. And some aspects of it will work just fine. It'll survive the raku firing, but I just don't get that nice detail. You know, when I did these, when I did them, the first thing I told everybody is I was going to make them out of porcelain. They said, oh, that's pretty cool. And then I said I was going to raku fire them. And they said, no, you don't raku fire porcelain. I said, well, I want to. And the next thing I did is I left sharp edges on a lot of the stuff. You know, and everybody kind of wants to have everything kind of smoothed out when you're doing ceramics. So I left sharp edges, and they didn't care for that too much when they first saw them. And I'm talking about my friends when I would talk to them about what I'm doing. And then I said, I'm going to do glazing for all the logos and the brands and stuff. And they just, no, you can do decals. That'd be. But all those decisions actually in the end is what made them successful. And I think, if anything, you just got to kind of go with your gut as to what you think you want to do and what you want to accomplish. I look at this stuff here and I can't believe that anybody would necessarily want to buy some of these things, because to me they're just these personal statements that I made about myself or about what I'm doing, but I can't imagine that they mean that much to anybody else. But on the other hand, I look at other artists and things that they've done, and they probably feel the same way about their art, that there's a certain honesty to it, I'm sure, that comes through.
I'm thinking that your passion that you put into it is what's coming forth and makes it so appealing.
That would be good. That would be good.
Passion is very attractive to me.
Yeah, I don't feel like I'm ever answering to anybody on it. The only thing I ever swayed from was the logos, was some of the petroleum companies. As I said, you know, and then I kind of felt guilty because I felt like I was really borrowing. You know, Warhol did it, and a lot of the greats did it, but I felt like I was kind of borrowing on Mobile Gas's popularity in that, and you know, maybe I should be a little more original. One of the things too that sort of happened is when I first started making them, they were very realistic. I'm talking about the gas cans, the tea cans. When I first started making them, they were very realistic, like a real trompe-l'oeil sort of thing. And then they started getting into a little more fantasy as they got a little bit more ridiculous. Like what in the heck this dial would ever do on the top? You know, it has no in the fact that, you know, to put the graphics for tilting up and you know, so, and then they started to flare out at the top and flare out on the bottom. Then my OCD started to kick in on different things, and I think every one of these. Oh, I didn't do it on the. Every one of these usually has a bare spot on the left-hand side. There's like a bare piece of clay. This one I did for a magazine when I did this one. So that one I probably bent the rules. But most of them I scuff off some clay. Every one of them has a bolt that's been pressed into the top that's got the letter U in it. Trying to think of some of the other things that I can't like let it leave the studio without doing that.
What's the letter?
For you. YOU. It just felt right. Yeah, some of this stuff, I don't ever say aloud. You're working in the studio by yourself and you're doing this stuff, and oh, that makes so much sense. Like when I made this one just made so much sense. And it's called Holy Science. And I just thought that was perfect. The fact that you'd have religion on one side and science on the other. And the bottle forms, I did totally miss out on it. The bottle forms have two sides. One side is half the story, and the other side is the other half of the story. Sometimes it can be two things that oppose each other. Sometimes it can be things that support each other. And then the stuff that's in the middle is kind of all the stuff that happens in life that keeps those apart, or in some cases I just get bored and they're sort of decorative. This piece here, I've got the war piece and the milk pitcher piece. And then I've got money running around on the inside. This one here, those are supposed to be like little chromosomes or science things like that going around in the middle. God's present in the smallest stuff, and so is science, trying to find it. Some of these are real obvious, like I love this regular pot. I was hoping nobody would buy this. This one here is I'm doing a series of plates that show the stomach. And so you get a plate, and then as you eat the food, you would reveal your stomach, and there's a phrase that says, so can you guess where your food is at now? Because you're now able to read the plate, and you've got the food inside you, so you're trying to guess where it's at. And I started knocking around that whole phrase of what's an exceptional pot, what's a normal pot, what's a regular pot. And so the regular pot is basically about the food moving through your system, and it says, can you guess where your food is at now? And it shows where it's going in, and then it travels all the way to the back where it comes out, and it says not yet. So that one was kind of fun. This is the him and her. A lot of this stuff is relationships with him and her. I think that's probably... Yeah, I don't want to talk about that. I think that's it.
Malachite, it seems to me, is almost like a glass-like substance.
Yeah.
Is that what gives it a plasticity?
I think what it does is it gives it that thermal shock, and I think also it acts like a grog, the way a clay that's got grog in it. It's a lot easier to throw it, and so the porcelain doesn't want to kind of fall apart. Do you throw porcelain, or have you thrown porcelain? Yeah, and it's like pushing butter. I mean, wherever you go, that's where it stops. It doesn't really have a plasticity. But I think that malachite keeps it in check. So it doesn't quite just kind of lay there. But to me, it's got to be the magic ingredient for the thermal shock when I raku fire it. That and the fact that it's not fully vitrified. I think if the clay was fully vitrified and went in for the raku process, that when it came out, there'd be a greater chance of it cracking in that. I'm pretty obsessive about there being a universal thickness, or as close as possible, around anything that I raku fire, because that's another big thing where if you got really thick pieces of clay and thin pieces of clay, it'll crack. But a lot of experience. The thing that was interesting about the gas cans is I had an image in my mind of where I wanted to go, and it helped me evolve as an artist to not just sit down in the studio or sit down in the wheel and see what happens. It forced me, it taught me to have a goal and to go towards it and to test and retest and keep working towards that goal so that you can achieve what you've got in your mind. For a lot of years, I would wedge up the clay and say, I think I'll do a teapot, and I'd sit down and do a teapot, or I think I'll do a vase. But first of all, I wasn't thinking about how it was going to look in the end. I was just going to see what happened. But with these, there's a lot of engineering and there's a lot of planning. There's figuring it all out before I even start, and sitting down at the wheel. And I have some flexibility as far as the height and the shape and the arrangement of the stuff and that. But I pretty well know what I'm going to do, and I basically already have a graphics package in my head as what I'm going to be putting on it, and I know the colors. And when I do pieces, I pretty well know the color they're going to be. I know how I'm going to glaze it and all that, and it's more or less I've received this order, this commission, my own personal order to sit down and do this, and I'm just carrying it all out. And in some ways, it's more job-like, but in other ways, it's a lot more liberating because I can be playing around with it and all that, and I can make and end up right where I want to be. But at the same time, I'm not wasting my time doing a lot of things that I don't really care for because I just sort of happen to be in the studio and I happen to have clay in my hands. I've actually got this plan. So I make a lot fewer pieces probably than a lot of potters, but what I do make, I'm kind of already going for that definite success, if that makes sense. Yeah. Like to do like this piece, I mean there's a lot of planning to do this piece. Now first I tracked down, first I figured out what I wanted to say, the fact that, you know, Dr. Frankenstein created Frankenstein's monster, you know, and the heart was a big deal, and bringing him back from the dead, and that's a Gothic romance or a Gothic story. It should have a Gothic form to it. I've got to have the heart on there. I like the fact that it's wood. That's kind of an older material for the wood grain. Then I thought about that whole QR code. That was really big for me right there at that moment. And so then I got to do all those graphics and stuff like that. There's a lot of planning to do that. I'd make the templates for the window form and all that. And I experimented with a couple different sizes, you know, working with paper templates. When I make a piece, it's kind of all figured out in paper already. There's paper templates for all these pieces. Before I start them, I make like a paper cutout. And the demonstration I do this afternoon is going to be that form, different graphics, but I've got like a paper cutout that I use to cut out all the shapes and that. Some of them, I don't know if I have, like the two, I call them hump bottles on the shelf here. These are almost like origami. You know, I have to, when it's made, I've got templates for the sides, and then I've got a template for this strap. And I roll out my clay, and I put all the impressions in, and then I cut it out, using my template, and then I wrap it around. But I have to know where all the graphics go when I'm pressing them into the clay, so that when it all goes together, you know, it all reads right and forms that way. That's that obsessive behavior, but I like that. You know, I feel much more relaxed when I'm making a piece. It's like you did all your homework and it's the test. Yeah, it's comfortable.
What was the opposition to using porcelain with raku?
Oh, you use a raku body with lots of grog. Yeah, you should use a stone. That was what I was told. You don't raku porcelain. You got to use a raku clay. They make raku clay, and it's got a lot of grog to survive the thermal shock, and all that's very true. But I wanted porcelain, and I've tried rakuing a lot of different porcelains since then, and they crumble. I just got really lucky when I happened to pick that clay body. And I labored over that piece. When I make them, I don't think about throwing. I think more in terms of being on a lathe, and I will throw the form, and the actual bottom of these will be that thick. that's all trimmed away. The inside of that's all trimmed away. And they're made, you know, and they're all different pieces, like Ford's assembly line. You know, there's the body, there's the dome that's thrown, the spout's thrown, this collar is thrown, this is thrown, this is handmade, these are all handmade. So I've got all these parts that go together like a model kit, you know, and I put them all together in that. But when comes time, I throw all these parts or roll all these parts and I have them. When it comes time to actually start putting it together, I'm thinking more like I'm on a lathe. You know, I've got my Giffen grip set up and I'm carving little nooks and crannies, extra nooks and crannies in there so that it's got that very machine precise feel to it.
You doing that carving on the wheel also?
Yeah. Yeah, so it's funny because it's a different mindset. And I use a lot of metal tools. I don't use, you know, to get these sharp edges and stuff. You know, and that was all sorts of things. It was hard to not do that. You know, it just seemed so nice to just put a chamois on there and just smooth that out. But, you know, I left a lot of that, you know, like little sharp edges and ridges and stuff that would be nice to put a chamois on. But, you know, I'm just going to leave it. And when you look at it when it's done, that's kind of how they do have the thin little metal tooling marks and things like that. I think that's probably it.
The American dream, part of the scheme. It's gotta look mean and mean. You gotta join the team. The American dream, out of control. Going down for the last time, throw the lifeline and get ready to pull. The American dream, can't lose sight. Gotta huddle together and hold out to each other with all of our might.